Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another ISIC event, the Bridge Researchers. Okay, so if you can go to the next slide, please, Anna.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so first I would like to introduce the group for anyone that's new about what is the Bridge Project. Bridge Project, that's one of the ISIC projects that have been created to bring together conscientiology researchers around the world, facilitate knowledge exchange and sharing interassistantial experience. This is a free online event that you hold every first Sunday of the month, and where a speaker presents a topic of self-research. And I just want to mention to the group that, as usual, we are going to be recording the event. So let's talk a little bit about ISIC. ISIC, yeah, the next one. Yeah. So ISIC is the interassistantial service for the internationalization of conscientiology. That's a no-profit organization run by volunteers. It's part of the conscientiocentric institution, okay? And we have a current status of pre-conscientiocentric institution, okay? So our motto is opening doors, building bridges. That's our spirit. That's what we want to do. We want to connect people around the world. So let's introduce Anna. Anna Yogan, that's our presenter today. She's going to talk about grief and dying. She is a physician specialized in cardiology, echocardiography, intensive care, and brief psychotherapy. She knew conscientiology since 2003 through IIPC, that's the International Institute of Projectiology and Conscientiology, and currently she's a volunteer of Representia in Florida, United States. She recently graduated in nursing, and Anna, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Marcelo, for everything. Thank you guys for joining us. First of all, I'd like to introduce the principle of disbelief, which is one of the greatest pillars of conscientiology, which is don't believe in anything. Experiment, have your own experiences. Why do we start everything with that? It's because nowadays we are doing self-research, and the scientific method cannot accomplish that because the scientific method separates the scientist and the research. And when we are dealing with conscientiousness, we are dealing with the researching being also the object of research. So that's our motto here. So why talking about death? Recently, I watched a very interesting series on Netflix. It's called The Last Word. It's about a lady that loses her husband, and she goes through grief, and she says this very phrase during one of her approaches to someone else that was grieving, because surprisingly, she becomes an eulogist. Eulogist is that person who gives the speech when somebody dies. So neither the son nor death can be looked at steadily, because it's a very difficult topic. It's not easy to talk about death. But despite of being easy or not, loss is a daily occurrence, and death evokes profound terror. And this is from one very interesting article that presents us with the terror management of death. It means that we live our lives because culture provides us with a worldview that protects us from this death reality. Because if we focus on the possibility of our life finishes, we cannot really live. we can lose this continuous desire to live. And finally, why talking about grief? Because grief is the price that we pay for love. And there is no life if we don't love anything or anybody. And love is what makes our days possible. Okay? So I didn't have time to change this slide. This slide is from a picture on Facebook. And here we can say that if we don't find motivation to talk about something, motivation might find you. So let's talk about death before she finds us. Okay? And I am here to talk about my self-research and also to talk about my small deaths, my daily deaths and things that happened in my history. So some of you guys knew before I came to the US, I used to sign Anna Marcia Abrão. And this is the one that existed until 2009 when I moved in here. I was an accomplished physician, and then I married an American guy, and I moved to the US, and I couldn't be a physician anymore. So I had to grieve the death of one of my identities, one of my personas, which was the physician. And during that period, I had to find some meaning on my life because I had my ego very intertwined with my physician identity. And recently, like 3 years ago, I can say, my mother was also diagnosed with Alzheimer and vascular dementia. So I had to start dealing with anticipated grief because she's going to lose her mind and she's going to not know me anymore. And this is something that made me have some panic attacks and a great anxiety. So that kind of, triggered my interest in this subject, which is called the soma, which is lost. The loss of the soma, which is our physical body. And I joined then the Invisible College of the Somatology, which is one of the groups of research of Conscientiology that helps people who are dealing with grief, who are dealing with losses, and this studies this difficult subject. So being a nurse, which is now my current identity, helped me to know some other layers of care. So for instance, this pyramid here, you can see that we have several levels, and those are the levels that the nurse address mostly. But it's still very narrow because mostly in the hospitals taking care of our patients, we deal with physiological levels and safety levels, sometimes with love and belonging, because those are the most basic levels that we use to survive. But to really go to these other levels, that is esteem and self-actualization, you really need to dig deeper, to study yourself more, to find more motivation, to find more meaning in your life. And then it also offered me in the nursing study with the psychological development, which is part of psychology. And it has some stages that happen from when we are children, and then while we evolve through adulthood, and then when we become elders. But it's like something very confusing for me, because, for instance, I had this integrity versus despair crisis, who supposedly people have when they are more than 65 years old. I had when I was around my 40s. So this is still a very intraphysical model to explain how we can evolve and how we can grow as a person. So, for instance, a teenager goes a lot about how to find his identity, and they also become confused about that. And this is a great deal of a task that they have to finish to go to the next stage. If a person doesn't really find his real identity when he is in adolescence, he's not going to become a mature adult. And so these are kind of explain why we have so many adults that we meet daily that just act as child. And they didn't go through all these stages. And whenever you don't accomplish a task in these stages that were proposed by Erickson, you kind of become stuck. So it's just like you are in your mommy's belly when she's pregnant, and you have to be born, and you are in the delivery process, and you don't want to get out. But life is about evolving. There is no way of getting stuck. So life provides us with the experiences that we need to learn. I am going to go through these slides, but if anybody feels like want to ask something or talk about something, please interrupt me, okay? So why talk about death? Because actually death influences deeply how we live our lives. It influences how we do our health options, how we take care of ourselves, and how we also have our health outcomes. For instance, if we are in a treatment, people who do not deal well with their lives, they don't have good results when they are submitted to medical procedures, for instance. So in terms of a biological definition, death is an irreversible cessation of circulatory, respiratory, and brain functions, including the brainstem. That's the part of the brain who provides us with all automatic responses like breathing, our heart beating, and so on. But this is just about the physical body. We also have like to think in a broader way, which would include our existential life. So I like a lot a definition of that doctor in Brazil that studies palliative care, which is Ana Cláudia Arantes Quintana. She says that life is an incurable, progressive, sexually transmitted condition that will lead us to several types of disabilities, and in 100% of the cases it's going to bring death. So here she brings up a very important point. Everybody wants to die suddenly, right? I don't believe anybody wants to die of cancer or dementia or any kind of chronic disease. Why? Because we don't want to avoid really death. We want to avoid the suffering that accompanies death. That's the big problem. So to deal with suffering, we have to learn a lot. That's something that we do not learn in med school or nursing school. That's something you have to dig really deeper to learn about. And the end of life is the process that the next inevitable exacerbation of a disease is death. So sometimes people think, oh, it's going to be euthanasia if I let somebody die. But if that person has, for instance, a very severe dementia, a late stage Alzheimer, it's not that not giving food that I am going to murder that person. What is really killing that person is the dementia, not being starved, okay? So that's a really very difficult concept to understand, because it brings a lot of ambivalent feelings, like it brings guilt because of the relationships that we have with the person. Sometimes it might bring anger. It might bring a lot of ambivalent and contradictory things. Okay, go ahead, Simone, please.
Something. Don't you think that some people might prefer to have a condition to prepare for it? I know it can be controversial, but from different perspectives. So even without going to the extra physical aspect of the after death, but to going just to the fact of being able to prepare to say goodbye to your loved ones, adjust things because you know, hey, I'm gonna die in 1 year. I better put my act together, or I better reconcile, forgive, right? Do all these things, you know, straighten out my bank accounts and divide my fortune.
That's
right?
the very concept. That's the very concept of palliative care. Palliative care is when you have a terminal disease of some kind that there is nothing that's going to cure in medicine. You are in palliative care, and you have time to deal with all the dimensions, like the physical dimension, the spiritual dimension, the psychological dimension. And there is a very interesting study that a nurse did, and she wrote a book about the 5 top regrets that people have in life. Mostly it's not being happy, but it also has to do with prioritizing time. And this is the time that palliative care offers you. It offers you the time to reconcile with who is going to stay. Because you can see death in 2 possibilities, from the perspective of who is dying and the perspective of who is staying. And we are going to see that further in my next slides. So we can discuss more about that.
But then, in your opinion, do you think that people still prefer to have a sudden death? On your research,
I think so.
That's still prevalent?
Most of the people, if you make a research, you can ask, who wants to give a lot of trouble and work to your family when you die? So everybody say, I don't. I want to die suddenly because it's going to be done. But in reality, if you go to statistics, this is something that is going to happen in 1 case in 10 cases. It's like 10% of the cases, it's going to be sudden death. All the 90% of the cases, we are going to be giving some work for our loved ones for at least 3 to 4 years. So that's why I feel like it's so important to discuss this theme, because we have to come to terms with the possibility of living well, aging well, so we can have a good death. That's the important thing.
Thumbs up.
Okay, great question. So some key concepts here. So what is a loss? Loss is any undesired or unexpected change or removal of a valued object, person, or situation. And grief is the physical, the psychological, the spiritual response to loss. How we perceive loss, it's going to acquire some meaning to ourselves. So this is going to be regulated by our type of personality and our type of culture. And mourning or bereavement is the outward expression of the grief, which includes suffering, distress, sadness, misery, anguish, sorrow, regret, and even illness. This is an article that describes some physical and especially psychiatric illness that people develop because they don't deal well with the loss of a loved one or the loss of some really important existential value that they hold. And here we are going to talk about the types of loss so we can understand. If we remember that first slide about the development, we have all the psychological development that it's like more internal, more psychological. So that's how life acquires meaning, trust, how we learn to trust, and how we also learn what is fair or just in life. And it has a lot to do with maturity and culture. And so this was a picture that I took when I was in China. And I found a very interesting definition of what is culture, because it's responsible for a lot of what we are. And it's what really makes us a stranger when you are away from home. Because in China, this lady is dressed very beautifully. And if we put her here in the US, everybody's going to think she's a crazy lady. How can somebody go to the streets dressed like this? Okay. And so here we have to develop this cultural intelligence, we have to have these cues, the awareness of the values, and also the knowledge necessary. We are going to also see that there are some parts of our cultural identity that are visible and others that are completely unconscious that we have and we hold, and they are really important, but we don't even acknowledge that we have it. And then comes the motivation, the bear after the guy in the bicycle. So here are the situational deaths or situational losses. So generally they are some external factor, some physical or environmental factor that are going to cause us to feel uncertainty, vulnerability, doubt, and this is going to require mechanisms of adaptation so we can overcome that threat and keep functioning as a normal individual with health and relationships. So relationships are actually a greatest part of how we adapt to changes, because they are kind of the base of how we deal with the road as well. And one of the reasons that we are also talking about grief, death, and this mortality salience is because of what we are going through. So the zeitgeist of our society has in one side our expectations that we were having a normal life, and suddenly comes the coronavirus and takes everything that we know for sure and changes our life completely upside down. And in the same time, we have in September, the Suicide Prevention Day, because September is called the Yellow September. And it also has the Alzheimer Day. So those are possibilities that are linked to the team, and we have to to kind of evaluate how much resilience we have and how much compassion we have inside us, because these are also great tools to deal with this difficult reality, which is the fact that we are all going to die, irrespective of age or physical appearance or whatever you do. That's a common fact for all of us. What will really make a big difference is how we deal with it, how we react with it. So that's what I want you to get like a glance from whatever I researched. And so you can also help me to put it together, because this is a process. It's something that is still in course. So here is the model, the iceberg model that was proposed by Hall. So culture is essentially like an iceberg. What we see, we hear, what we sense is called the universal external determinants of culture, which is more like explicit, what is learned, what is pretty much conscientious, and what is easily changed, and normally how we obtain it by objective knowledge. And underneath, we have what is internal, what is really deep down, which includes our myths, our beliefs, values, and thought patterns. And these are mostly like implicitly learned. Like, for instance, biases are included in this category here. And most of the times they are not conscious. And they are very difficult to change and difficult to acknowledge as well. And then comes Professor Valdo Vieira, that proposed another worldview that goes beyond the intelligence, the cultural intelligence, which is the evolutionary intelligence, which means we have several vehicles that we manifest ourselves, and we manifest ourselves in different dimensions with these different vehicles. And we also have multiple lives. So theoretically, whoever had the idea of the consciential paradigm shouldn't be afraid of death, because death is all just a transition, and we are going to lose this physical body, but we are going to have the psychosome, which is the spiritual body, and we still have our consciousness that is going to be intact. But the real fact is, despite of this, we still have a lot of terror and fear of what is going to be afterwards. So who started studying death in the very beginning? So it was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that she wrote the book about death and dying. And she proposed some stages that people can go through when they know they are and they have a terminal illness. So first of all, they go through shock, which is like completely disbelief. They feel like they lost their reality. Then they go through denial, which is like a form of avoiding to know what is happening. They also go through anger, and they are in that stage, why me? Why am I going? Why not my neighbor? And afterwards, they also go by bargaining, when they started like trying any type of treatment, whatever the herb they can find, or they promise to God that they are going to some sacred place if they get cured. And then most of the times they go through depression until they reach acceptance. And what I think that is very interesting of this perspective is that she talks about acceptance and about the catharsis, which is pretty much what happens when you kind of surrender. And you don't surrender because you feel like you are giving up. You just surrender because you feel like united with nature and united with the process of life. And you kind of sever the links that you have with this dimension, and you open yourself to a new experience. So this is the perspective of who is going. And sometimes it can be kind of explained mostly in the terminal stages of diseases. It doesn't go exactly in this manner. Sometimes it can, like depression can come first, denial can go last. It doesn't have a really an order, or sometimes they can be all mixed up together. But it was a first way of approaching this subject. And later, we had Worden, which was another psychologist, that he proposed the course of grief mostly focused in who is staying and who is losing the person. So for instance, the first stage is the stage of shock and numbness, which coincides with what Kubler-Ross also said. So in this stage, you have to accept the loss. So there is great distress, it evokes denial, it evokes anger, but it also evokes some ego defense mechanisms that are going to allow you to emotionally survive to this very terrible shock. Then you go to the second stage, which is mostly like yearning and searching. So the person is processing the pain. So it's important to cry, to long, to pine, and have all these emotions and associated with the process. Obviously, there will be some physical changes, like some decreased appetites. The person might stop eating, might stop going out, concentration and memory are impaired. So this is a very difficult process and sometimes the longest one. Then comes despair and disorganization, which kind of requires the adjustment to loss. So there is a desire to give up and withdraw and disengage all these feelings. But then the person becomes kind of numb. These feelings are replaced by some type of apathy and very like, how would I say, the person become energetic. The person loses the life will. And then we have this last process, the last stage, which is the stage of pretty much of organization and recovery when the person finds an emotional place to the deceased. So instead of, pinning the loss and crying, the person is going to internalize that the deceased still lives inside their hearts and still lives inside their memories. So instead of being just in the pain process and the suffering process, the person starts like going towards life, and then the appetites and interests return, and the person can have more like positive memories and more like a life experience. So these are the Worden tasks of mourning, like we described in the last slide. So we have to go through a process that is sometimes being in pain and loss, which is like a pendulum movement, and also sometimes go towards life, which means restoration. So accepting the reality is a very important stage. Then processing the pain of the grief, another fundamental stage. Then the third phase would be adjusting to the road without the deceased, which pretty much is like you never learn you never lose a person. You actually will have to learn to live with that person in another dimension. That person becomes invisible, but she or he is going to keep alive in your memories and in your heart forever, because every person leaves a legacy, and they are still alive in your memory. And then comes the restoration phase, which is finding this enduring connection with the deceased and embarking in a new life, which means that we are going to have a life that is completely different from what it was in the past, but it will still have meaning. So that's a very, very important step to take. And then Kubler-Ross, she proposed also this other type of graphic, which I think kind of put the two models together. The model of Worden and also her initial model. So instead of calling these the death stages, the dying stages, she calls it the changing curve. So she gets the stages of death, which are here: shock, denial, frustration, depression. But she also puts here the stages of experiment, where you start engaging with the road. And then she also describes here the decision of going back to the road and integrating the painful memory in another form, in another way. So I believe that's how the process goes. And here is like a moral and confidence, which kind of oscillate depending on each phase we go. And then this is over time what happens. So that's a very interesting way that also includes not only death, but it also includes how we can deal with change in general. So then we are going to talk about the types of grief. So there is normal grief, which is like a natural, a physiologic response, and it is kind of coherent to what a culture requires of us. It can be like a healing, restorative, or transformative, but it also can be different of that, which is the complicated grief. So whenever our defense mechanisms and our internal resilience doesn't know how to deal well with the death process, we can have this second type, which is the complicated grief. So for instance, if we are going to say an anticipated grief, it's one, for instance, an unexpected death, which is very disruptive. It kind of entails a very, a great difficulty to deal with that loss. And for instance, another type, which is the disenfranchised grief. This is one that it's not allowed by the society. The person, for instance, is in a homosexual relationship, or sometimes it's a mother that loses a baby, and the society doesn't recognize the grief. So the person has to go through all that process that we saw, which is not an easy thing, and they still deal with all the biases and prejudice from society that doesn't recognize the grief as a legitimate thing. So this is a very difficult one. And depending on the type of attachment that we have to the person, the grief can be, for instance, very abbreviated or even short-lived. For instance, we have that person that was in a relationship that was already kind of finished, and that wife and that husband, they didn't like each other. They didn't have anything in common anymore, and suddenly one of them died. And then 2 months later, you see that that person went there and remarried. Why? Because that attachment was so weak that the loss was very short-lived. So those are some examples that are complicated grief. And if the grief remains complicated and the person doesn't work in some way of processing that grief, you can find people in emotional crippleness, which is an unaccepted loss or an existential loss that makes that person kind of stuck. Like we mentioned in the example of the delivery. It's just like being a baby that is right there in the channel to be born, and it doesn't want to, it cannot go back, and it cannot go out either. So you are kind of stuck in that process, and you have to do something to get out of that phase to come back to life. Otherwise, you probably are going to get sick with physical or psychiatric problems. So the complicated grief actually has some risk factors that we have to consider. So in one side, we have traumatic circumstances, which is like, for instance, the death of a spouse, of a child, the death of a parent during very early childhood or adolescence, a sudden, unexpected or untimely death, for instance, an accident, a suicide, or a murder, or even multiple deaths when some type of natural or collective disaster occurs. And in the other side, we have the risk factors for the vulnerable person. So the person will not have the resources to deal appropriately with the grief. So one of the processes is low self-esteem, low trust in others, which has something to do with our upbringing, when we don't have a good relationship with one of our parents, previous psychiatric disorders or suicide attempts, an absent or unhelpful family, or a lack of social support, even conflicts or unresolved relationships. For instance, whenever you have an ambivalent relationship with someone, someone that you love but you also hate, and that relationship is not something smooth and tranquil. So whenever death comes, that's going to be a real problem to deal with. And in this type of insecure or even dependent attachment, that's going to create a lot of difficulties in terms of processing death. So this is my last slide, and I hope you guys have a lot of questions so we can talk more than I am doing all the talking here. So the legal and ethical considerations about death include euthanasia. Euthanasia is basically when you allow the natural death process to occur. But there are two types of euthanasia. One is considered passive euthanasia, which is like you allow the process of death happen and you withdraw any type of life-sustaining aggressive measures. For instance, you take the person out of the respirator, you don't give hydration, or you don't give food through any type of device. So this is the passive one. That's what is mostly done here in the US in several cases. And there is also the active euthanasia, which is also called the medical assisted death, which is kind of when there is some type of action that is done so the person can achieve the death. So it includes, for instance, doing sedation or giving some type of drug that's going to stop the process of living and cause the death, even though the person would going to die anyway. So the assisted suicide, for instance, is a type of active euthanasia, when the person goes to the doctor and asks for some pills, and they go to the pharmacy, get the pills, and take the pill themselves. So in some states here in the US, this is permitted, but not in most of the states. I believe that the most adequate way of going would be what is called the orthothanasia, which is pretty much when the death occurs in the right moment, when you had time to do your goodbyes, and you just allow the process to happen, but you also take advantage of all the comfort measures that palliative care can offer you, that hospice care can also offer you. And in the other side, we have the dystonasia, which is when the person requires all the life-sustaining measures that are not going to save their life. Despite of doing everything possible, the disease is going to kill the person. So for instance, my dad was in an intensive care unit for 49 days. He had chronic kidney failure, he had severe diabetes, hypertension, and he had a very severe pneumonia. So no matter what they could do for him, and they kept doing like a ventilator, hydration, hemodialysis, all those things wouldn't save him. He had no chance of getting out of that ICU alive. And you just keep doing futile, aggressive medical treatments that are very invasive, that the person is going to suffer a lot, and that is going to only delay the process. So here it's like a lot of food for thought. So you can like figure out what would be the best way to go. I don't have a formed opinion, because I already did some documents that say some things that I desire to do if something happens to me. But we have to consider which type of illness you have, because it's different. If you have a heart attack, you want all those saving measures to be done. But in the other hand, if you have severe dementia, or if you have like you are brain dead because you had a severe stroke, and if you recover, you are going to become a vegetable. Do you want any of those severe measures and aggressive measures to be done to you? That's a question that each of us will have to answer. And to kind of give some information about what can be done in terms of legal and ethical documents, we have the advanced directives that are some written or oral healthcare documents that whenever you go to the hospital, the nurse is going to ask if you have one. And it pretty much tells how you want to die. If you want to be resuscitated in case you have a cardiac arrest. And it's very specific. Depending on the disease you have, you tell if you want to be operated, if you want to go onto the ventilator, if you want to have artificial circulation, artificial food given through some type of device. And it kind of gives some directions towards what to do. And most of the times, this here is very prevalent in the US because of cost. Because what happens is sometimes people don't have any documents, and then they get in some type of situation and they go into a coma, and the family doesn't know what to do. And they can like spend millions in ICU care because of not having advanced directives. The second one is a living will. It states the instructions that you want. So it's like a legal document. And this durable power of attorney, it makes somebody responsible to make those decisions in case you become incompetent, which means like you are going to be unconscious and you are not going to be able to decide for yourself what you want to be done. And this is a very important thing here, is that this person has to do and choose for you based in your preferences. So it must be a person that knows you well, because the person is not going to do these decisions, to make these decisions based on her own or his own convictions. He must do these decisions based on the individual that is sick, how he or she would decide. And for last, there is the DNR, which means that they do not attempt resuscitation order, which is a prescription by a physician that might be, that has to be like a very recent, very up to date, because if you have something like that and it is like 2 years ago, you might have changed your opinion. So despite of having that, the family can sometimes decide it differently. So whenever you want this to be done to yourself, you have to have your doctor very like in the same page that you are, and your family also in the same page that you desire. So that can be done without causing a big ethical and moral squander. So this is my last one. And I love this picture. I also found it on Facebook, so it doesn't have any how do you say that thing? Credits. I don't have the credits. So anyhow, whenever we learn how to deal with our attachments, that's when freedom happens. And I think we must learn a way of thinking about death more like a surrender, but not a surrender of giving up on whatever you feel like it's important, but more like in terms of accepting that it's part of a normal process and a normal step of evolution. And Rumi also has a very nice say that a quote, I mean, that grief can be a great way of achieving compassion. So if you keep your heart open through everything, your pain is going to be like addressed, and it's going to become your greatest ally and your partner in life to achieve love and wisdom. So that's pretty much what I had to say to you guys. I thank you for your patience for listening to me, and I hope we can have some questions and some conversation, so it's not only a monologue.
Thank you, Anna. And let's open for the questions of the group. I have a couple of them, but anybody would like to start? Yep. So let me warm up. Okay. So I think, Anna, I think that when we talk about death and what we call in Conscientiology, the soma, the activation of the human body, well, that's not something that everybody gets comfortable to talk about, okay? Mm-hmm. And then just warm up, okay? You've been to different countries. What are the difference that you see on how people face and discuss the grief and death around the world?
Well, I have a limited experience because I just know Brazil and the US. Those are the places where I lived my whole life. My experience in Brazil is more like in the physician side. And when we study in the medicine school, we don't learn to deal with death at all. We don't learn to deal with suffering at all. We learn to avoid it, and we learn to kind of freeze our emotions. And that's one of the things that took me to the path of studying psychotherapy, because I wanted to understand more about suffering. I wanted to understand more how to help people with something other than a pill, other than injection, other than some type of medicine. And in Brazil, people are very religious. So most of them, they deal with death in a very difficult way. The Catholics, they are very like attached and they suffer a lot. And in the other hand, these people from the Spiritism, which I was part of this movement for a while, they see death more like a transition, and they have let's say a different paradigm, and they accept it a little easier than the other ones. For the other religions, I don't have a lot of experience to say because Brazil is a very mixed country. And contrasting in the US, since the culture here is very materialistic, people avoid and deny it very much. And all those documents that has to do with bioethics is more like a way of being in control and being in some type of power position, because they really don't accept aging or death at all. It's something very difficult. And when they have to deal deal with that. Most of the times they compartmentalize those things, and they go through that type of masked grief. Sometimes they are going to have like physical symptoms instead of living the pain and living the process. Sometimes they are going to simply go through the process of denying, and whenever they have a loss down the road, then they are going to relieve the grief from whoever they lost like 10 years ago. So this is mostly what happens, and unfortunately, that's a culture that we need to change. In Brazil, we have the Invisible College of the Somatology. That has been a great help to change this culture. And recently, they published a book called The Soma, which has a lot of information, and we try to go through our week reunions and talk about this subject, and try to learn and understand more of this, because whenever you talk about death, you learn to live better. That's the bottom line. You prioritize your time.
Yeah, and then I think that as you get more familiar with the stages of dying, okay, could be helpful for each one of us, because I have a casuistic that one person that I know that it was in denial for a long period of time, during a long period of like 3-4 years, sick, when the person go through the soma, the activation of the human body. I think that was kind of 1 or 2 years after this person went to this extra physical dimension. I met with this person there, and it was in a post-mortem psychotic state. He was not aware that he was in other dimension, that he didn't have any more the body. Okay, so it's a good topic.
In another perspective, like it's very curious, because Americans, they make like great movies that talk about that, and put a lot of let's say situations where people go through the process, and even put this extra-physical dimension to be shown on the screens. But in real life, they really have a lot of difficulties to deal with this subject.
Yep. Anybody would like to make additional questions? Don't be shy.
Yes, Monica, I see you are there. Monica is a dear colleague from the SEED, which is our Invisible College of the Somatology. She's the coordinator there, and I've learned a lot with her. And she talks about this topic with a lot more propriety than I do. We are all learning together.
Oh yes, this is the process, but I'm here just to watch, and I mean, that was excellent speech, and it's really good. The topic is not easy to talk about that. No, nobody wants to think about it, to talk about it. It's very, still, unfortunately, a topic that's we have to work on, bring more natural way to discuss and to really talk, like it's not something that brings fear all the time. And until we get to this point, I think the suffering is going to be continued. And that's what I think that goes together.
Yep.
So I think the more we have people talking about that and open in discussion, I think that's the way to go.
And that's the natural way of the path of our multi-existential cycle. Okay, we are going from one dimension to the other, the somas, resomas, and so on. So death and rebirth, okay, intraphysical, extraphysical, okay, spiritual and physical world, and so on. So we need to talk more about that, Monica. I completely agree.
And when you learn the existence of the other dimensions and the astrophysical, and you start living in a way, both ways, makes you understand more and make, I think, life easier.
Gives a lot more meaning, right?
Yeah, because that really gets another image, and you start another kind of relationship with, you know, whoever cross to another path, to another dimension. It's really real. It's not something that you have to believe in order to survive the loss. You know, it's integrate in you. So it makes everything easier. But it's another topic.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Jack? We cannot hear you, Jack.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, now it's better.
All right, thanks, Anna, for the presentation. It was interesting. I'm wondering more about, so when somebody passes away, the person left living, if they know about astral projection, OBEs, in the CDP program, it's been spoken about, don't try to contact that person right away. You're not sure of what they're going through, where they are. Is there a guideline for when the person can try to make extra physical contact with somebody who's died, or some thoughts about that?
Well, actually, there is an excellent book about it, which is called Projectiology. So if you learn to get out of your body in a conscious projection, you are going to be able to meet your loved ones and also know a lot more of this extra physical dimension. So the greatest thing is that we kind of live a minimal death every night while we go to sleep, because we get out of our body and we get to go to the extra physical dimension, where most of the people that already went through the soma are going to be. So this is a capacity that is physiological. It's nothing that anybody has to be special to do. So there are several techniques, several possibilities that you can use. And Professor Valdo Vieira, our teacher, he describes several techniques that you can use and see which one is going to work better for you, so that you achieve this possibility.
I would add just one additional comment on your answer, Anna, that when you're thinking about the timing to reach out to someone that went through the soma recently, that went through the death process recently, I would be a little bit more conservative and cautious and give some time for that consciousness to recover. Okay, I think that on the right time, if that consciousness is ready and if there is a need, he's going to reach out to you on doing a astral projection or lucid projection. And sometimes, if needed, the helpers, just like happened with me, you guide you to that consciousness to give some support to that consciousness.
Because you also obviously have to consider not only your state, how you are feeling, but how that other consciousness is feeling as well. So depending on the way that person died, if it was like a traumatic event, if it was a difficult death with a lot of suffering. Sometimes this consciousness, they are taken to hospitals in the extra-physical dimension. And they go through recovery processes there too. So this kind of meeting just happens when it's adequate for both parts. It doesn't occur like because I have the desire, it's going to happen anyways. The person has to be in a good condition for that process to happen, and it's going to be a good thing for both of you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I guess it sounds like more like perhaps the helpers or others letting you know, okay, you can, or now's not a good time, because otherwise you may not have any idea and think, oh, this is enough time. It's been 3 months, let's say. So
there is not a recipe or a prescription then when the time would be right. Even the helpers, they are not going to go there and tell you, oh, this is the right time, because the helpers are not going to tell you what to do. The helpers are going to give you a perspective of what could be a good option or not. And that ultimately you are going to be the person to choose. So it demands a lot more of a self-research on your side than expecting something from the other side to happen. So I would say, just like in that movie from Kevin Costner, if you build, they will come. So construct your self-research, dig deeper inside yourself, and then get ready, and then it might happen.
all right, thank you.
Ana Paula?
Hey, Anna.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the talk. I really enjoy hearing you and the perspective of death. I think it's quite related to aging. And I think there are two topics that people really don't want to talk much about, because I imagine being old means being close to death. But I would like, when you, Simone asked you about the aspect of dying suddenly or die from, from illnesses or later in life as a result of illnesses. Or anyway, I was thinking, do you think the desire of wanting to die suddenly, it might be related somehow to how people face death, and also how they are prepared for it? That's one question. And another question is, from the countries where I lived, I noticed that people have, they actually, when they have the funeral, they celebrate life, not death, not a funeral like we have in Brazil, where people have this, now it's not 7 days, but yeah, they have the funeral and everybody is kind of crying. And the places where I lived, where I went to funerals, I noticed that people would come and talk about the person's life, what they've done, sometimes jokes about how they were. And it was interesting to see this. I don't know if you see this in America. In Brazil, definitely we don't have that approach. And I thought that will be quite a refresh way to see how we relate with death. That's another one. What do you think now? How the culture can print in us certain way of dramatize death or not? And given that we study conscientiology, how do you think we can help people to actually go through motions to dramatize the idea of death and start to enjoy more life instead of avoiding the death? There is a saying that if we avoid death, we avoid living our lives. Mm-hmm. So I would like you to comment those questions. I'm so sorry, I've done 3, but I hope it's not too much. It's not too
Please
complicated.
remind me if I forget anything, but let's go in.
It's all right. It's all right.
Where do you live? Just curiosity. Where do you live?
Currently, I am in Brazil. I'm Brazilian. I was born in Brazil, in Belo Horizonte. But I moved from Belo Horizonte, from Brazil in 1999. Not from Belo Horizonte, but I moved in 1999. And I've lived in 5 countries, most Anglo-Saxon countries. So that I'm temporarily in Brazil right now.
But you said that where I live, the culture is different. And so...
Where I lived there for 15 years in Australia. It's quite different. In Australia, in New Zealand, in England, I didn't have an opportunity to go and see a funeral. In Spain, I went, but not invited. I just want to see how it was. And quite similar to how we deal with death, maybe because of religion. But I noticed in New Zealand and Australia, very different, very, very different, very fresh. And people celebrate real life, not death. And that caught a lot my attention.
I think in Germany too, we just...
In Germany as well?
I am, but I've never been in a funeral there. I just saw a movie related to this topic, and it seems that's culturally accepted. That's more festive than the sad.
Yeah, yes, and I see in the East, and the East has the very different way, I think. Some places they even don't see death like a big problem, like in Japan or India. It's different, the approach. Mm-hmm. But within our East culture, like Anglo-Saxon and Brazil or Latin American culture, it's a big difference. And I think that's why I was asking Anna what she thinks about this and how the culture could impact the way we see the death process and so on.
So addressing the first part, I think most of the people, they want to die suddenly because they are afraid of suffering. That's the big problem. So if you die suddenly, most of your family and friends, they are going to suffer a lot, but you are not going to suffer. And that's the big point, because if you have like a long-term disease, most of the times you are going to suffer a lot. But as Simone mentioned in the very beginning of our conversation, if you have that time to prepare, if you have like a predictable death, you have a lot of time to retrospective your life and really take advantage of that time, to say your goodbyes, to, embrace new relationships. There is a very great book about it. I don't know if you've already heard about Mitch Albom. He's the guy who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie. It's a very interesting book that kind of catches this journalist that was living like a zombie in his life, what most of us do. We lived like zombies, and then suddenly something happens and we have to think about, well, what I am doing. I'm not really living. I am kind of dying instead, right? And so I believe that's the biggest reason that people have that difficulty, that great difficulty with this topic, because they want to avoid the suffering process. The second part of the question was, remind me again. Or did you forget to?
No, the cultural aspect.
Oh, the cultural aspect. So I believe some cultures, they see it differently, because some people, they put death like the inverse of life. And actually, the inverse of the death is not life, it's birth. And what is between birth and death, it's called life. So if you kind of see the whole process in this way, you are going to have different rituals, different ways of approaching death. And I've seen some cultures like Chinese and Japanese, they pretty much celebrate death because it's like the finish of a process, the finish of a series of accomplishments that that person had in that period called life. So our culture, like the Brazilian culture and pretty much the Western culture, it kind of sees death as an enemy, as something that is going to make you like deprived of something. And instead of accepting that as a normal process of evolving. And that's where I think Conscientiology adds a lot, because the evolutionary intelligence, it says that it's the way you can look at life and evolve yourself, and also kind of help the evolution of those that are close to you. So if you have this more open worldview, you are going to see the process as a possibility of growth instead of a possibility of sadness and grief and loss. And reading a little bit about compassion, I can say that pretty much that's what makes the difference. Because if you are compassionate with you and you live a life where you kind of focus more in what you are grateful for and the things that you can accomplish even though you are suffering and even though you are having losses and difficulties, you develop a lot of resilience. And this resilience is what is going to get you through all this process. And most of the cultures that value the older people, the elders, they have this different outlook. And then they see death as a more approachable thing, not something that it's like so terrorizing as everybody else does. I believe I answered your question.
Yes,
if I left something out, please let me know.
No, it's all very interesting, your answer. And yeah, and I was asking as well because we studied Conscientiology, and they are very a set of ideas, no, and philosophical life and so on that can help people to face life and death in a whole different picture, no? And so how can we bring and help people to talk about death and not to help not be so morbid about this? You talked about the USA, that people don't talk about these subjects. And how do you think, what we should do, what could we do to help to have more talks about this? As your friend from the College of the Somatica, it mentioned, no? How do we bring people to talk more about this in your experience as clinical physician and so on, or cardiologist, no?
I believe that each of us is a little piece, you know, that can make a difference. Like if you change your worldview and you go through your life, you are going to be making a small difference everywhere you go. I am sure that Monica does with her patients. I am sure that you do with your patients as well. Marcelo also is going to do in his field of profession as well too. So that's the form that I see. And if you want to go a little deeper, I invite you to take part of our group. The Invisible College of the Stomatology is an event that occurs every week. We have online reunions every Wednesdays, and we discuss the death team, and we also see what happens during the week that has to do with the subject, and we also read books and watch movies about it. So it helps to demystify the subject. And if you want to start in the cultural process and kind of learn a little bit of how the German culture looks at it, there is this very nice series at Netflix that I just watched. It's called The Last Word. It's a very interesting series, a short, it's just one season, a couple of episodes, that it puts the subject in a very light way, and it's not difficult to get it. So talking about the team, it's certainly what is going to make a huge difference. And I believe that people doing it, it's a matter of time, and the worldview is going to change. Right now, while we are speaking, there is a huge conference happening in Brazil. It's called the Infinite event, which is taking a lot of people, very important people that talk about this theme. And I believe that's how change happens. It's spreading the word.
Yes, yes. Okay, okay. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you. And once again, thank you very much for your lecture. Well,
thank you so
really
much
enjoyed.
for your patience and hearing.
And one question, Anna, on the Invisible College of the Somatology, do you have also activities in English that you can share with the groups in ISIC?
The activities are in Portuguese because most of the members are Brazilians, but maybe we can, maybe throw the idea and talk to Roberto Almeida, which deals with the invisible colleges in Brazil, and make one in English that would contemplate whoever cannot talk in Portuguese, whoever doesn't speak Portuguese.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's a possibility.
But they have some colleges that already do that.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is specifically, that would be a suggestion. It's a good one.
Yep. It stays as a suggestion. We may have some people that would be interested on the topic to go a little bit deeper and cannot speak Portuguese.
Yeah.
Well, if the person wants to contact the Invisible College, we have people that are English speakers that would be able to talk and kind of clarify some subjects and doubts. But in terms of being a member and taking part of the reunions, it would be difficult because there would be the language barrier.
Understood.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody would have additional questions?
It's
Okay.
a death silence.
Yes. So Anna, if you can progress with the next two slides, I'd like to thank you. Thank you everybody that attend us for this wonderful lecture. You did great, Anna. It was a gift that you gave us.
Thank you
And
so much.
I would like to invite everybody for the next event that we are going to have in 1st of November, that will be with Viviane Passos Gomes. She's going to talk about adaptability, and I think that will be again a wonderful opportunity to exchange experience. Thank you all for joining this ISIC event, and let's talk again in the next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.